This is the second part of the life and the monument of James Lenox Dutton. Last time we talked about how he inherited the Dutton Sherborne Estates and his marriage, his second marriage, and his extensive family. We talked about the three most important marriages of his children. And in part two, we want to talk about a variety of just interesting occurrences that happened while he held the Sherborne Estates. He held them from 1743 to 1776. His family had occasional medical bills with Sir Hans Sloane in London. This is the founder of the British Museum. His collection is the basis of the British Museum. And interestingly, they visit him as a physician in London. The Oxford Journal reports in December of 1764 that a man has been committed to our castle, John Hurst, and he's charged with selling table linen at Burford. Burford is just across the border, about 5 miles from Sherborne in Oxfordshire, suspected to be stolen from James Lenox Dutton. It seems upon his examination, he denied the stealing this linen himself, from whence it is probable that if he has a confederate, he may become evidence. I know it goes to trial. There's another article short like this in a future newspaper where 2 men are put on trial for stealing the linen, but I don't know the outcome of it. Another something that I found interesting, this is an image by the National Trust. The National Trust owns this image of James Lenox Dutton, and in their collection, in Sherborne Park Estate collections, they have some artifacts like a wig stand. While we don't know for sure that James Lenox Dutton saw this wig stand, it is possible. We know that the Dutton family had in their possession campaign wigs, bag wigs, bob wigs, etc. And you can see James Lenox Dutton's portrait here. He is very likely wearing a bag wig, and so his wig may have been stored here by him on this wig stand. One thing you can find out about James Lenox Dutton, if you do much searching at all, is he was very involved in horse racing. It must have been his passion. He had an inheritance of many racehorses and stables, and a good reputation from his maternal uncle, Sir John Dutton. So if you look for him in the newspaper, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find out about his horse racing and how he's performed, or how his horses have performed in the latest races. Sometimes those races are in Gloucestershire. Here in this article, he is putting a horse in for It says here, a beautiful strong bay horse, 5 years old, 15 hands high, bred by James Lenox Dutton. And then who the horse's ancestors are. The aforementioned bay horse was a very promising colt and would have been trained, but he was lamed in breaking. And that happened in March of 54. This is an article in 56. And so they will breed this horse. It is located 23 miles from Oxford, 20 from Gloucester, 10 from Cirencester, 8 of Stow-on-the-Wold, and 6 from Burford. So come on down to Sherborne, and we'll let you breed with this horse. We know that he subscribed to the sporting calendar every year in the 1770s. The sporting calendar took subscriptions, and so those are recorded. Contained an account of the plates, the matches, the sweepstakes that had been run in Great Britain, Ireland, and in Jamaica, in case they wanted to know what was happening in Jamaica. And then the abstract of the matches that will be run at Newmarket, and he often races at Newmarket, and other matches as well, and there are some close by. His most famous horse is often in the newspaper, King Pepin. And here he is bred by James Lenox Dutton. And he shows up, this King Pepin, sometimes spelled a little differently, his name, but he's often in the newspapers. Interestingly, in 1750, there is a man sentenced to death. His name is John Midwinter, for willfully killing a mare, the property of James Lenox Dutton. It's not King Pepin, but the value of that horse was £100. We know that at Sherborne there was a large orchard with pears and cherries and peaches and nectarines and apricots and plums and figs and vines and orange trees. And so we know there's a sundial engraved with the Dutton arms was set up with a tin cover to protect it. And I suspect these aren't in the pleasure gardens, but probably if you've been to the Sherborne Estate, where the vegetable gardens were, and many people have plots there today and raise vegetables. During James Lenox Dutton's tenure at Sherborne, he commissioned this painting, which is the Dutton family playing backgammon. Not only is it a fine piece of art, but it's one of the rare images of a family playing this game. This is his heir, the future first Lord Sherborne, and I don't know which of his daughters this is. This is an image from the National Trust. We know that their livery in his era was green for those that worked for him. This is a button from later, because you can see here he was Lord Sherborne at the time, but buttons like this with Lord Sherborne's markings may have, James Lenox Dutton's coat of arms may have been on green livery at the time. Later, it's not green anymore, but did find out that interesting fact. In May of 2016, this inkstand that used to be at Sherborne House was sold for £4,000 at auction. They were able to identify that it was his because his arms as a Dutton were engraved on it. Again, horse racing. Did I mention he's very involved in horse racing? And this is not only his passion, but helps him to socialize and with the other landed gentry and aristocrats in the counties and nearby counties. So we can see in the Bath Chronicle in 1769, he's got a horse, Dominic, and another chestnut colt, and another horse, Beatrice. He was also participating in horse racing close by. There was a horse track out by Bybury. In 1763, it's noted that he is giving money for the relief of the poor nearby. In 1764, he builds a quote-unquote highway from Certain Northfield to across a Turles Bridge, around the corner from Humphrey's Garden, and believe that this is likely the road from Sherborne up to Clapton on the Hill. Got this information from a local historian, Byron Hadley. Also, in 1769, he gets on a bad list from a book called A List of the Absentees of Ireland. And so he used to be very much a present lord in Ireland. But now that he's inherited the English estates, he's left Ireland, rarely comes back to Ireland, and so they are putting a list of people together who are seldom or never seen in Ireland, and this is the approximate amount of money they believe leaves Ireland from James Lenox Dutton's estates and goes to England. He sends his sons to Eton. His second son, William, is there from 1765 to 1768. And James Lenox sends gifts to the headmaster and undermaster each of those years. William wrote home once in a letter to his father, "I wish you would be so kind as to let me have tea and sugar here to drink in the afternoon, without which there is no such thing as keeping company with other boys of my standing." William is the son that will inherit his Irish estates. He doesn't leave all of it to his eldest son. We also know that James Lenox paid money for public entertainments and that some of the monies were spent for Morris dancers. There is a very famous troupe of Morris dancers called Lord Sherborne's Morris dancers. That troupe would be later because we don't have a Lord Sherborne quite yet, but it is interesting that it is a great tradition even in this era. In 1731, this is shortly before he becomes the holder of these estates, his uncle had commissioned this beautiful portrait, and it is now at Lodge Park, which is a National Trust property. But this would have probably hung at Sherborne House and been something he was very familiar with. Now that we've seen some of the interesting events and artifacts from his era, let's talk about the will of James Lenox Dutton. First, he has a will that he's had standing for quite some time, and then his wife unexpectedly dies. This is his second wife who gave him most of his children, all except his oldest. And here her death is recorded in the Oxford Journal, this 8th of June, 1776. It says, "On Tuesday last, the remains of Mrs. Dutton, wife of James Lenox Dutton, Esquire, passed through this place," meaning Oxford, "in great funeral pomp to be interred at Sherborne, Gloucestershire." And it does strike me that it's right around this time that the American Revolution has broken out. The First Continental Congress is meeting in Philadelphia and vigorously debating whether they should formally declare their independence, even though the violence has started. We'll never know if he knew for sure about the American Revolution. But he edits codicils to his will. And in his will, he was very generous to his wife, who has predeceased him, though. And so his edits to the will mean that he'll take out all the references to the things his wife gets, and he'll redistribute. William, his second son, will get £1,000 and most of his Irish estate. Ralph will get £500 and some of his Irish estate. Interestingly, he says, if that lawsuit that is going on is successful, and the lawsuit is about the legitimacy of another Napper relative, if that lawsuit succeeds, then all of those lands that are involved in the lawsuit goes to Ralph as well. So let me stop and explain that a little bit. James Lenox Dutton has a relative in Ireland named General Napper. And General Napper's will leaves his Irish estate, which was substantial but not vast, leaves his Irish estate to his legitimate male heir if he were to ever have one. And then in default of that, it would go to James Lenox. Well, at his death, it was automatically assumed then it would go to James Lenox. But General Napper's mistress appears with an infant and says that she and General Napper had secretly married and that this boy is legitimate. And this lawsuit over those lands will go on for 2 generations. It will finally be settled, I believe it's in the 1840s, by 2nd Lord Sherborne. And he's spent over £40,000 on it and loses the lawsuit. It was tried by jury 5 times in Ireland. 4 times the Duttons lose. And later Lord Sherborne complains that he'll never win with an Irish jury. So Ralph won't get those lands. Other parts of James Lenox Dutton's will, his son-in-laws, Blackwell, Master, and Lambert, each will get £50 so that they can buy mourning clothes for his funeral, and so they can probably wear those for the days requisite that they need to for proper mourning period. The friends, the Duke of Beaufort and Peter Warburton, are to receive £100 each for rings. And I'm not sure what that tradition is, so if anybody knows what the tradition is for rings at death, do contact me. The Gloucester Infirmary is to receive £200. The poor of Sherborne and Northleach, £20. The poor of Eastington, Aldsworth, and Windrush are to receive £10 each. He, like his uncle, wanted to be buried at midnight in the family vault, although he didn't ask to be buried only by his servants, as his uncle had done. The family vault is not the family vault that one can see in the Sherborne churchyard. That family vault is a little bit later. James Lenox would be one of the last of the Duttons to be buried in the original family vault. We are hypothesizing that the original family vault is under the current church, and that one of the slabs near the door, the north door, is likely the entrance to that family vault. The church is moved a bit, at least 10 feet or so, between the time he was buried and the church, how it stands now. In the codicils, right after his wife's death, he makes some very interesting changes. I give and bequeath to the same Duke of Beaufort in trust to lay out and expend the same £1,000 on the intended enclosure of my said manor of Sherborne, which I believe is the creation of the pleasure gardens, and the completion of my house at Sherborne. Here you can see in this area it's always spelled Shireborne. The next generation, though, everything starts to be spelled Sherborne in our traditional way. Upon the plan I shall leave for that purpose, and I earnestly request that my said son, James, that the bills and charges of the several workmen employed in and about the same be brought to the said Duke of Beaufort regularly, every 3 months, to be discharged, so that as little trouble may be given therein as possible due. So some interesting things. He's already working on enclosing of the said manor, which I believe is the pleasure gardens, and he wants the completion of his house, and some of that work is being done. But he says to James, take the bills and give them to the bills of the workmen and give them to the Duke, so he'll make sure all this gets done. And furthermore, he says, I do hereby declare that the reason of requesting his grace, meaning the Duke of Beaufort, to see that such improvements are made, so far as the said manor will extend, is that my said son James appears inattentive to those things which so nearly concerns the interest of his own estate. This is very critical of his son here. Does this get done? No. The house is not remodeled. He does not work on the house. And it does seem to be something that's very pressing on his grandson, however. because second Lord Sherborne, as soon, almost the day he is Lord Sherborne in 1820, makes extensive plans to remodel the house, eventually does remodel it, but that's a story for another day. This is what Henry, the Duke of Beaufort, looked like. His seat is at Great Badminton here in Gloucestershire. And then I want to tell you with one of these last slides here, this is the family tree of his son. So the son that he had just mentioned in the will that he thought was inattentive, what does his family look like? We talked about earlier that his son, his heir, had a fabulous marriage with Elizabeth Cook. And so she's going to be the sister of the future Earl of Leicester. And his sister marries the future Earl of Leicester, that there's a double marriage between the Duttons and the Cooks, and that they will have these 4 children. They're going to have their son, John Dutton, who will be second Lord Sherborne. He will be the man who remodels the whole village, builds the model cottages, redoes Sherborne House. He also marries a great heiress, maybe the greatest heiress of the age, Mary Bilson Legg. She is Lord Staywell's only child, so she inherits all of his estates. Then his next, so this son and marriage turns out very well. His daughter Elizabeth marries the future Earl of Suffolk. His daughter Anne never marries, is the spinster. His last daughter Mary marries Prince Barentinsky, a Russian prince, leaves the country with him shortly after their marriage in 1806, and dies in childbirth in Germany, fleeing from Napoleon's troops. The child survives and is brought back to Sherborne, and you may have heard of this fascinating story. There is a miniature book, a large pamphlet in Sherborne's church on her and her life. And there's a beautiful monument to Princess Barentinsky, the mother, in the church. And John Dutton's heir will be third Lord Sherborne, and he will marry his first cousin. And so we have another marriage between the Suffolks, the Howards, the Earl of Suffolk and Berkshire, another marriage with the Duttons. And so Elizabeth Jane, the eldest child of the Earl of Suffolk, and his wife, who is a Dutton, will marry her first cousin, James Henry Legg. And there's lots of other very interesting people in this family, many stories to tell. So I hope you will stay tuned, because the story of the Sherborne Estates and the Duttons who held it will continue. Thank you.